Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the SD.RB podcast. Today Kevin Clark is going to be talking to us about his arts plugin, which is used to test RJS templates.
Okay, well, I'm going to get started. So, we've been doing mostly Ruby stuff tonight. I'm going to show you some flashy stuff and some Rails. So, quick feedback and it's going to be pretty. So, pay attention, I guess. My talk is on testing RJS templates, which are part of Rails, which allow you to actually generate JavaScript from your actions in the code and send it back to the page without a page reload. So all of the new apps you've been seeing that you click something and it refreshes the page immediately. If you know the Ajax buzzword, that's what this is, and it's really, really easy and really cool with Rails. Also, if you were here last month, you saw me quickly struggling to show a demo on how to do it, and it wasn't going well. So since then, last weekend I wrote a testing framework for RJS because it's such a pain in the ass to get it working. So that's what I'm going to show you. And we're actually going to start from scratch. We're just going to do a quick blog with Ajax posts. So if you haven't seen Rails before, we start off with the Rails command, and we're just going to call this blog, assuming I don't have a project called that directory. So the Rails command immediately bumps out all of this stuff, which is really everything you need to. I'm sorry, that's not the right directory. Which is everything you need to start a Rails app. We'll look at it in the browser. And as you can see, we've got an app directory, which is where the bulk of our code is going to be. Similarly, we've automatically got a test directory. I'm going to bump up the font size on this when we start looking at it. But as you can see, we already have, if you're familiar with the MVC model, model view controller, Rails appears to strictly. Models map directly to the database and allow you to deal with business logic. Controllers mediate between the model and the view is what actually shows up. So you get to separate your business logic, your transactions, from your views. So what we're actually going to do is use one of the Rails code generators because I want to do this quickly and easily. So first we're going to, actually, you probably want to use generate model all the time. So for our model, we want to generate a post. So this is going to go ahead and generate the actual model file itself, which shows up in models, which inherits from active record base, which means it's going to connect to the database. Additionally, it creates a migration for us, so we can add the posts model to the database. We're going to go ahead and do that. This is a really cool Ruby way of defining what goes in, or how your database schema changes, and allows you to do it versioned and allows you to roll back and forward as you need to. So we're creating a table called posts, and we're not going to call it name. We're going to call one field title, and we're going to make another column called body, which is a text field. So you'll notice we're not necessarily using normal database types here. Rails is able to make it generic. So because we're defining this in Ruby, once you tell it what database you're working with, it will translate it to whatever you're doing. So this will work with MySQL, SQLite, PostgreSQL, really anything under the sun. So that actually takes me to the only bit of configuration, really the only bit of configuration you ever have to do in Rails development, and that is telling it where the database is. So it defaults to MySQL, but I like working with SQLite because it's quick and easy and I don't have to set anything up, and it's really fast. So here I'm just going to tell it that the development environment is going to use this dev.sqlite file for its database. The test environment, which is used only for automated testing and is cleared out every time you run tests, will also use SQLite. And we'll put the test file. And you know what? We don't really care about production. If we were sending it off to somewhere else, We might, but since we're just testing, I'm just going to use the same development. I'm just going to use the same configuration as our development environment. So that's it. Additionally, the one of the other files that is added is unit tests, and this you can use to test your model. It automatically has the skeleton built out for you. We're not going to deal with that at the moment. First, we're going to go ahead and migrate our database. So, actually, we're just going to run rake migrate, which updates our database to the latest version. It's created our table. Now we're going to go back and, you know what? Let's go ahead and build out something so we can look at it. So I'm going to use something called scaffolding, which you don't use very often, but I'm presenting and I want everything to be there. So here's Scaffold, which will actually build out a basic controller and views for your basic create, read, edit, update, or edit, delete actions, your CRUD stuff. So we're going to do this as the blog. Actually, I don't remember the usage. So we'll take a look. It goes model name and then controller name. So we want this to be using the post controller, but I want to call it blog or we want to use the post model, but I want to call it the blog. So we're going to use post and blog controller. And as you can see, it generates all this for us. Now, as I said, you don't generally do this in Rails for most things, but since we're jump starting everything, we're going to go ahead and do that. So now we can actually take a look at what has been generated for us. And Rails comes with a built-in web server. I have Lighty running on mine, so it automatically uses that instead. So now we can fire up our web browser. Well, if you're running in the development environment, it reloads the code every time you hit it anyway. If you're running in production, you're going to have to reload it because it caches things. So this automatically runs on localhost 3000, and we're going to be greeted with this little screen because I haven't updated the default route. But if we look at the blog controller, if you haven't seen Rails before, the basic route looks like the controller name and then the action name and then an ID, and it automatically works like that. So here, by going to blog, it automatically goes to the index action, which you can see actually redirects or renders the list action. So you don't really need to worry about that. My talk isn't on scaffolding, but the point is here we have this new thing where I can type I have a post, here it is, and hit create, and now it's shown up. So let's spruce up this listing page a little bit. We don't want it to view like this. We want to actually see our postings. So if we go to views and blog, because it's for our blog controller, we can see the list. Now, this is just all default scaffolding. I don't want any. So we're gonna start from scratch. If we look at the blog controller in the list action, we can see that we're actually grabbing the posts using this paginate function. That's fine. We won't worry about that for now. But the important thing is that this posts instance variable is set with the 10 posts from the database. So we're actually going to use that object in our view. So we'll call this div posts. So that's where everything's going to go. And then within this, we're going to cycle through each of the posts. Create a new div with the post ID. For post and post is actually just a little bit of syntactic sugar. The actual method is each, and this feels more Ruby-like. I like it better. For blah in blah doesn't feel like Ruby. So, I'm sorry, was there another question? some other languages have incorporated as well. But so we're going to make the post title heading. Now, if I'm going a little bit quickly because most people in the audience have seen Rails before. What you're seeing is this is an ERB template, or it's a .rhtml, so it actually evaluates So really all I'm doing is generating posts, printing out the title in this H2 tag, and then we'll make it pretty, and we'll use the textualize method, which automatically uses the textile parser, and we'll print out our body. So post body. So now, if we go ahead and look back at our list method, we see I have a post. Here it is. But let's make it so that we actually can post from this page. This is where RJS is going to come in, because we're going to do what's called an Ajax Interaction. So here, we're going to actually put our form for posting. We'll just put it at the top. We'll call this our entry form. Actually, you know what? Let's start with the test. Now, I'm going to just print out the form. It's not going to do anything yet. Then we'll go with the test and make it happen. Because I want this to be test-driven to show off the arts plugin. So here in our entry form, really all we want to do is render our, and again, if you're not able to follow this, I'm trying to go quickly so we can get to the bulk of my talk. So we're going to render the form partial, which is right here. And then, where did my string go? So we're going to render the form partial. We need to put in a submit tag. Called create. And the only other thing we need to do in order to do an Ajax interaction, actually, we'll do a regular one first. So the form tag, or we want to start the form tag, and this goes to the create action. So now, if we take a look at our listing, here's our body. I type we can click on create, and everything shows back up. Here's our new post. But it's kind of clunky. We've still got this form here. The stuff's down here. We had to do a page reload. That's not real pretty. So what we're going to do is use RJS. So RJS, as I said before, is a way of creating JavaScript to send back to the browser on the fly. One thing we need to do before we start our RJS is actually look at the create action, which is what actually does all the work. So the first line, we create a post more forever. We try to say successful. We redirect our list back. Otherwise, we redirect. So what we really want to happen here is ideally, let's take a look back here. Ideally, what we want to happen is we hit enter, the form goes away, the post shows up down here, and let's highlight it for good measure. So we're going to start with the test. If you caught my talk last week, what the test looked like is very similar to what RJS looks like. So to add this plugin, you just do script plugin install arts, and then assuming my server is up, it will download and install for vendor plugins directory. Give them a minute, and it should be working. If not, I have the project. Okay, got net, so give it one more second. The network's slow apparently. If not, I can just copy it over to my local repository. There we go. It's just running slow. It's usually not this slow either. So in one more second, it should do a checkout of the repository that the arts plugin references. Then we plug that directly in, and it should print out some usage information any minute now. Okay, you know, we will just copy it over from my local. We'll leave that up just in case the site's working. So, there we go. So now it shows up. So as you can see, as it adds, it doesn't normally take that long, folks. It prints out the README information. To use it in the tests, we're going to include this line, include arts, to include the arts module in our tests. And this is actually what if you're familiar with RJS, you'll see so we will use our tests to describe what we want to happen. So we're going to bring up our blog controller test. And really what we want to happen, we're going to ignore this create test for the moment. And what we really want to happen is we want to test the create with RJS. So the first way to actually do an RJS interaction in tests is to use the Xhr method. That stands for XHTTP reference. I don't remember what it stands for, but what it means is we're doing an Ajax call. So we're going to use Xhr. It's going to be a post, and it's going to be to the create action, sending our post information. So the title is my title. The body is this is a post. So that actually runs our create method. Now, what we want to happen is we want let's see, what do we decide? We wanted the form to go away. So we want to hide, we called it entry form. So that's the entry form div. We want the post to be highlighted. Actually, you know, we'll do the insert HTML first. So we want the new post to be inserted into the, I think it's going from top to bottom, so the bottom of our posts. So we want to insert HTML, and it's at the bottom of our posts div. One more thing you should note here is on fit where it actually inserts HTML, it's optional to describe content. So you can say, you know, I just want to make sure something is inserted at the bottom of the post div, or you can say I want this string to be actually something I'm working on. Looking for regular expression. So I can say I want, you know, something like this to show up. So we want insert HTML to be at the bottom of the post div. And finally, for a little flourish, we're going to do a visual effect. It'll be a highlight. And we want this to be on our new div. So the way we do this is it's going to be post, and then the assigns method. Can't read that right. You know what, let me make this text. So the assigns method will give us instance variables that were created during our action. So create creates this post instance variable that we saw earlier. So we want to grab the post ID because that's what we named it in our view. So if we run this, it's going to fail horribly because we haven't done any of this yet. So if we take a look, we can see, it actually has two errors, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But so there's no such table posts in the test database. So that's my fault. We're going to use the rake task db it's db clone test clone David. The thing is, when you run rake find rake, your development database will be updated. Your testing database will not be updated. When you run rake test clone or run rake, which opposite over automatically. So if I was just running rake and running all of our tests, it would have done it for me. But I just want to run the one test to show you how it works. So here we've actually moved over our database. So now when I run the test method, we should just get the one. Hide with args does not show up in response. So here's the response we actually got back. We can see it's HTML. It's not JavaScript. It's not doing what we expect yet. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that it's actually returning an RJS template. So if we go back to the blog controller, we're going to use a method called respond_to. Now respond_to lets you look at the HTTP accept header, and automatically all of the Ajax calls Rails set the accept header to say I'm looking for JavaScript back. So respond_to also works for other things like you can say I want XML back or YAML or really anything else. But we're going to use it for JavaScript because it's really nifty. So we want this action to respond to, and when it wants HTML, we still want it to do this stuff. But when it wants JavaScript, we're just going to want to have it render the template that I'm about to create. So, Redner, yes, Redner. Okay, cool. Oh, and I'm just going to create by default, Rails tries to render a template that has the same exact word, so we want to render the template create. So that doesn't exist right now, so we'll just create it and save ourselves the error. I do. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, our test would have found that. So, but as long as you're testing me in the audience, that works. So we're going to create that RJS. So now, if we look at our test and run it, we should get a different error message. So now we see hide with the arguments entry form didn't show up in the response, and the response is just blank. So that's happening because we haven't put anything in our RJS yet. Yes. No, not in this case, but you can specify which one it is by having a file extension in your render call. So, we're not actually doing anything in create yet. If you saw my RJS talk last week, you remember that when you come into this RJS block, it's actually already passed a page object for you, which lets you do all of your calls. So here, what we want to happen is we want to hide. And what was it that we wanted to hide? We wanted to hide the entries. So that's that. Let's run our test again and see if we get a little bit further. So now we see it fails on assert HTML. So theoretically, right now, it gets rid of the form when we do it, and we can actually verify that here. If I have the server running. So when I've got the server running, if I do, this is another, and we hit create. Oh, one other thing that you need to do, which I haven't done yet, is include the JavaScript libraries necessary for this, and to change this to say it's a JavaScript interaction. So you can do that with a cert tag. I'm not going to because it's big and convoluted, and we don't really have time for that today. But we're going to change this from a form tag to a form remote tag. The only difference in the syntax here is that you have to pass it a key to a hash for our earl. And additionally, we're going to go ahead and make a layout that includes a JavaScript library for this. So JavaScript include tag, and there are several libraries. Well, there's really two main libraries: Prototype and Scriptaculous, and the files that go associated with them. And they're bundled with Rails because the people who wrote them are actually on the core team. So we can just use defaults, and it will automatically include those for us. Now, we can verify that by looking at source. Seeing up here, it's included all of these JavaScripts for us for drag and drop and prototype and various other things. You do need to include the JavaScript whenever you're going to want to do Ajax interactions. But the great thing about layouts is that you can just define an application-wide layout or a controller-wide layout and make sure to include the JavaScript, and then you've just got it in one file. You don't have to update everything. Yeah, and that's true. But they're all already in the public JavaScript directory of the Rails structure. These are automatically included when you create Rails. Okay, well, I don't understand the question. Oh, yeah, the client actually does. Yeah. It caches. Oh, you're right. Cool. Okay. Well, now that we've done that, theoretically, one more time. Here we go. We hit create, and it goes away. So our test was telling the truth. It actually did send back JavaScript to remove the form post. So let's continue down our tests. So if we look at what's failing again, we can see that it's the insert HTML command, and it's looking for this new insertion that isn't showing up in our response. So we need to actually insert something into the HTML. So we want to insert HTML, and actually, to do this, I don't want to repeat myself because we've already described how to print out a posting in our list. So we're going to pull this out into what's called a partial. A partial is just a little bit of a view that you can re-render so that you've got it in one place instead of many places, which is kind of cool. So you prefix a partial with an underscore, and we're just going to call this our post partial. And we're going to just shove that in there. I'm sorry? I do. Thank you. So now we're at our HTML. And then instead of iterating through all of them, we're just going to render a collection, or render a partial collection. So our partial is post, and our collection is posts. So it automatically loops through all of the posts and renders the partial for each. I can't see it. I'm sorry. We're going to bump this up just a little bit more. Hey, it's far away, guys. Text is this big, so give me a break. Okay, so now we can see it should do the exact same thing it did before. So anyway, we've created this partial, so now we can reuse it in our create.rjs. So insert HTML actually takes all of the arguments that render does. So we're going to insert HTML. We're going to do it at the bottom of the posts div, and we want to render a partial, which is post, and we want here we're going to set the locals because we're not doing a collection. If you look at just a second, if you look at the post, here we've got this local variable that we haven't defined anywhere unless we tell it what it is. So in our create.rjs, we're going to say that for the locals, the post object is this post instance variable that we set in our action. So now, if we go back to blog controller test, and we run our tests, here we see that we've actually made it to the next one. Now it's failing on visual effect. So, let's see that happen. We'll verify that it actually does what it's supposed to. So now the post shows up. And we hit create, and we see now the post shows up. And it showed up at the bottom. But you didn't really notice it because it just appeared there and the other things were happening. So now we want to do that highlight effect. So again, you can see we're asserting the RJS is doing a visual effect, that it's highlight, and then it's doing it on this div. And if you haven't noticed, my goal for this plugin was to make the syntax as close as possible to the RJS itself, so you know what you're looking at. So here we've got assert RJS, insert HTML bottom posts. We left off the content, but if you look at the create RJS, we've got insert HTML bottom posts. So you only have to remember one thing. Okay, so now we've got our visual effect, highlight, and this big thing. So you know what? Since we've actually already written our test and it looks almost exactly the same, we'll just pull this in, do a couple of little tweaks, and this isn't the assigns anymore because we've actually got the instance variable. We want the post ID itself. So now, parenthesis, good catch. Thanks. So now, if we run our test, everything passes. So let's take a look. Pretty darn stuff. Now we highlight. So we hit create and we saw the highlight, which is really freaking cool. So you can use there's very few methods that you can do with RJS that you can't do with this plugin so far. One thing that we're looking at, or that I'm looking at adding in the future is you can do selectors in RJS by doing stuff like page and then the name of the ID. So instead of doing page.hide up there, I could have done page entry hide. Unfortunately, it generates different JavaScript than the hide call up top. So I'm gonna have to finagle it a little bit to figure out how to make it look normal. The other method that isn't supported yet is delay. And the reason delay isn't supported is because it puts this block around all the other things that you want to be delayed. And I haven't figured out how to make the syntax work there yet. So that's coming in the future. Let's put one more flourish on this. Just making the page hide is kind of clunky. Let's make it lined up. Visual effects. Yeah. So here's our blind up. We'll look at the test. It's going to fail because we're not doing a blind up yet. We're doing a hide. So, oh, you know what? Actually, I modified the RJS, not the test. So it fails because it's not doing the hide. So now let's make that test pass. So instead of a hide, this is a visual effect. It's a blind up, and it's on the entry form. So now it should pass, and when we reload our page, time, and we hit create, it blinds up, and it highlighted down there, but you couldn't see it because yeah, I can. And you know what? Let's make the order of the post reverse so that we can look at it, because it's just so pretty. Use them sparing. Use them sparing. That's because then it becomes this total sensory overload that doesn't make any sense and makes it less useful. Yeah, exactly. You know, the blink tag seems cool until you start using it. I'm sorry. No, I want the posts to reverse. So I'm rendering the partial in backwards. You're right. And I'll have to do that in the middle, or in a second. Right now, I do want it to reverse, but you're right. I want it to go to the top. So let's change our test. So instead of going to the bottom, we're going to the top. And if we take a look, our test is going to fail because right now it's trying to go to the bottom. Yeah. In fact, I'll show you that in just a second. So it's failing because we tell it to go to the bottom. We want it to go to the top. And now let's take a look at our pretty things. Now we hit create. Now we've reversed order. It's at the top. It's highlighted. It's really cool. Yeah, so that you can do it one at a time. Now the other thing that Chris mentioned is being able to look for specific context that's been printed in. So you know what? Instead of making the form go away, let's just like print out something that says this used to be a form. So instead of doing this visual effect, we're going to comment it out. Take a look at our tests and comment that one out because we don't want it to happen. But what we do want to happen is we want to replace the HTML within the entry form div with this was once a form. So we run our test. It doesn't pass because this was once a form doesn't show up. So let's fix that. So now instead of doing this visual effect, we do a page.replace HTML, and again it looks just like the test. We want to change this on entry form, and this was once a form. Now if I don't have any typos, this should pass. It passes, so now we can go actually take a look. And we hit create. This was once a form. So it passes because the content is there. Now if we change the content so that this is not a form, our test is failed. So we can actually wait. Did I save? I didn't save. Oh. So now we run our test, and we see it fails because this was once a form doesn't show up, but you can see this is not a form because I can't spell. Does actually. So you can see what's coming in and what isn't coming in, and it looks just like what you're doing in the first place, which was my goal. So yeah, you can do it. You can do it with right now. You can do it with insert HTML, replace, and replace HTML. because those are the only ones I think that actually insert anything. If there's others, tell me, I'll fix it. Additionally, I think I checked this in this afternoon. I just added, if you want to do negative testing, I just added assert no or RJS, which just does the opposite. It uses the exact same syntax. It just checks to see that it doesn't exist. Sure, we could change the name. It was just checked in this afternoon. So, I think it's pretty cool. Are there questions? Yeah, actually, when I showed Rick Olson, he said it probably was going to be updated for long. So, look at this going into the next version probably. So, yeah. So, you may not have to install this as a plugin. Oh yeah, it's pretty. Actually, the first iteration before it was doing optional content management or content matching was like 30 lines. Let me show you the current incarnation. I'm actually reusing Rails internals are really cool. If you have a chance to look at them, you should. And I'm actually reusing things that they've already got in there. In fact, I reused the generator that they used to make the JavaScript, and that's why it works so well, because it actually generates the JavaScript based on the arguments you sent in, and then compares that to what actually showed up in the response. So if we look at the arts plugin, so actually as RJS evolves, we won't have to modify arts because it just passes it along. So for assert RJS, we've got our special cases where it passes it off to insert replace and replace HTML because it does the optional content matching. But in general, it just does an assert where it grabs the response and checks to see if the generated JavaScript from the arguments we sent in exists in that response. So here, what's actually happening is create generator returns this JavaScript generator, and we pass that the arguments that you pass in. So you are actually passing the same arguments as you get in the RJS block, and those are sent directly to the JavaScript generator, and then it checks to see if the JavaScript that came back is the same as or exists in our response, and then throws an error if it doesn't. For the special cases, it gets a little bit more complicated, but this looks uglier because of the font size. But it's really not so bad when it's normal. But it really just does and you're looking at a version that isn't quite right yet because I'm adding in the regular expression handling. So you know what? Let me show you the version that we were using today. It's only slightly different, 3 or 4 lines. So this was the blog. So current version of that doesn't do doesn't do all the extra regex stuff. It's oh wait, that's the content blank. So it checks to see if it's blank. Or if it's not blank, then it does this assertion and returns things. Otherwise, if you haven't passed in content, then it just does this regular expression where it looks for an update with the name of the arguments afterwards if they exist. It's the same thing for replace and replace HTML. It's really simple. So yeah, and the only reason we use the regular expression otherwise, in fact, the first iteration which didn't do optional content matching didn't have these extra methods. It was just assert RJS insert, and it didn't. I'm sorry, it was just this, and you know what? Rick Olson has modified this today. But it doesn't have that block at the top that I showed you where it had if it's insert HTML. Wanted to add in the support for the square brackets and specifying the div, so I gave them access to the repository. So yeah, that's all it does. It's really simple. And then no RJS just checks to see if the other one raises or not. And it is complete with tests, which makes stuff pretty. Actually, I could do a talk sometime on testing core. There's like little tips and tricks. This actually creates a controller that I'm using later to test my assignments. So no, but you think them through. You think them through a lot. I actually rewrote a couple of the tests after I rethought them and decided that they weren't exactly testing what I wanted to. But for this, because they're assertions, I've really got two types of tests. I'm testing that assertions raise exceptions when something goes wrong, and they don't when everything's okay. So that's how all of these look. We've got nothing raised when it's what the method actually does. We've got a raise when it's not something the method does, and then similarly with no RJS. Cool. Any other, Dave? Yeah? Yeah. We'll give you a second. Any other questions on the topic? Cool. Thanks.
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.